Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June edition of the P&G Alumni Network webinar series. This is your host, Andrew Tarvin, and I'll be emceeing for today. And I'm particularly excited about not only the topic today, but also our guest, because when I first started at Procter & Gamble and was doing stand-up on the side, everyone that I ran into just about seemed to say, hey, have you heard of this guy, Rajiv Satyal? He's known as the Funny Indian. And he and I actually had an opportunity to meet when I was an intern, and then by the time I had joined full-time, he had left, and he was kind of the inspiration for me that saw that, yeah, I could actually make something of this humor idea. And that's when I started to do more of the humor in the workplace training and proclaim myself the corporate humorist and kind of find the intersection of humor and work. And a lot of it was inspired by not only his kind of success after leaving P&G, but also his mentorship. He and I have become good friends. So I'm incredibly excited to hear his take on how to be funny. And I know we're all going to enjoy it, not only learn something, but laugh a little bit as well. Before we jump into that, though, just a couple of kind of quick announcements on how the webinar series works. As many of you probably know if you've attended before, this is a relatively monthly series. We may miss a month here there, but for the most part, a monthly series. And the whole goal is to, one, connect members, to provide ongoing value for being part of the network, to provide insight, to leverage the expertise that we have within the network, people like Rajiv and last month, Andy Shee, and we've had Jim Stengel and a number of great leaders on to kind of share their different perspectives on different topics. And it's all part of the larger mission of the P&G Alumni Network, which is more than just a webinar series, but a nonprofit founded by former P&Gers, 35,000 plus members worldwide, officially recognized and supported by P&G. And the overall goal is kind of threefold: to facilitate connections of this incredible network, to provide enrichment and training opportunities, and then also to provide philanthropic opportunities as well. So that's the network. We are using GoToMeeting for our GoToWebinar for our webinar technology. So what that means is, one, you will see the kind of webinar screens, the webinar slides there. What you won't see is any webcams, so we don't show any of the footage. So you don't have any of the kind of messed up audio with voice and all that kind of stuff. Instead, allow the focus to be on the slides and make sure that we don't overload on any bandwidth, because we have people joining from all around the world. You will also notice that you are muted. We can't hear you, which is always a little bit tough as a comedian, because you make a joke and you just kind of have to assume people laugh, since everyone will be muted. But that doesn't mean that you can't kind of interact with us still. There is an opportunity to ask questions, and so I know Rajiv is going to be taking questions kind of at the very end. So as he is presenting, if any questions come to mind, certainly feel free to fill those out in the questions area over there in the panel to your right-hand side, and we'll try to get through as many questions at the end as we can. With that being said, it's now time to kind of share what's going on today with Rajiv. So Rajiv Satyal is an LA-based comedian and host. His TV Clean act has made him one of the most versatile comedians working today. He began it all in his hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. In fact, he has a great, unusual entry into stand-up, doing his first kind of joke act to then world #1 tennis player Pete Sampras in the locker room. That's quite a start to your comedy career. He has opened for Russell Peters more than any other Indian comedian, has opened for Dave Chappelle 5 times, and he performs weekly at the Laugh Factory in Hollywood. He has 12 videos with over 100,000 YouTube views each, and has been featured on NBC, NPR, Nickelodeon, FX, yada, 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 a bunch of other great places I'm sure that you saw in his bio. He's performed on 3 continents, and the former University of Cincinnati engineer and former P&G marketer has done stand-up at more than 100 colleges. His corporate clients include P&G 13 different times. They've brought him back: GE, Google, General Mills, Quaker Mills, Toyota, Cisco, and more. Rajiv, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and give you kind of control to make you presenter, and you can take it away.
Great. Hopefully you can hear me, Drew. Thank you very much for that great, wonderful introduction. I really appreciate that. And yes, it's been amazing that we've stayed friends, and really appreciate all the kind words. So thanks everyone for joining for the P&G webinar on how to be funny. Kind of a lofty and ambitious title to this, but let's see how we do. So I really appreciate everybody joining, and we'll go ahead and jump right in. As Drew mentioned, I am a stand-up comic based in Los Angeles, been there for 12 years, and it's been quite a ride. I'm going to share some of that with you now. And let's go ahead and see if, yes, good. Okay, that's always a moment of truth. What are the moments of truth, right? We talk about a P&G moment of truth. So that is a big one to make sure the slides work. So that's fantastic news. Okay, that's a load off right there. Like Drew said, I'll just laugh at my own jokes, which that way you know somebody's laughing, right? Like he said, it's hard to do this into a black hole, so as it were. So on the second slide here, what I like to do, of course, and as a good former PNGer, is to show you the agenda. I'll talk about the objective, give you my background, give you some tips, some very practical tips, hopefully. And like Drew said, we'll do the Q&A and then close it out. That's that. So that is the agenda. Let's talk a little bit about the objective for today. I don't want to make you search for it. Basically, I want to give you some philosophy, I want to give you some practicality, I want to give you some theory and some application both. So talk about the principles of stand-up comedy and comedy in general, humor, and what you can do with this information, because I think that's always a really, really important thing, is to know what you can do with it. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. This is my background. I was born in Cincinnati. Well, I'm Hindu, so I was reborn in Cincinnati. There you go. Okay, I'm just going to assume people are laughing, and that's that. So I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, went to Fairfield High School. I went to college to be a doctor because obviously I'm Indian. That makes sense. I was pre-med for a couple of years. Now I'm post-med. I just skipped the med part. That's where all the work is. So that never really ended up coming to fruition. I went to the University of Cincinnati, Cincinnati kid through and through, born in Cincinnati, Fairfield High School, and then University of Cincinnati. The reason I'm showing you the Bearcast media slide is because I named the radio station. That's my one claim to fame from UC, is I actually came up with that. We're the UC Bearcats, and I named it Bearcast. So I had to sort of do a retroactive kind of, hey, this is one of the creative things I did in my life, which I thought was kind of cool. I got a degree in materials engineering in the year 2000, graduated with that. And then I did a number of things. I interned, I co-opted at Wright Pat Air Force Base, where I worked on turbine engines, because I'm a turbine engine. Okay, I hope that isn't too offensive for anybody. That's how we're doing it. Hey, this is a P&G alum, right? This is an actual P&G office right now, so I think we're going to be okay. But I did a lot of things when I was at Wright Pat Air Force Base, scanning electron microscopy, X-ray diffraction, some really hardcore engineering, which I miss in some ways. That was a really, really good time in my life, but that was a great program at University of Cincinnati. I was all set to go work in semiconductors. That was a division of materials engineering. I was going to go to the Silicon Valley and work on computer chips that go in radios, go into DJ booths like this, go into televisions, all those sorts of things, solid state electronics. That was going to be my path. And then one day, P&G called, and I found myself working in product supply, purchasing. I was actually in the MDO, technically, and for 2 years, I did a lot of things in the purchasing spending pool. I found the main vendor for P&G recruiting, which I thought was pretty cool. I managed some very large spending pools. I was the world's largest corrugated buyer. What every kid wants, really, to be the world's largest corrugated buyer. That was really something. You know, all the other kids were playing with GI Joes, and I was just playing with cardboard. I'm like, you know what? Someday, world, someday, I'm going to buy more of this stuff than anyone has ever bought. I don't know about ever bought, but at the time, at least. And I think the most important thing I did in that role in the Sycamore building, if anyone remembers that, at P&G, the GO in the Sycamore building, is there was a vending machine on the first floor, and I always found myself short of like a nickel or a dime, and I started something called the Nickel Fund, where I put some change in a styrofoam cup, and I hung a sign up, so if anyone was ever short of a nickel, you could get a nickel out of that. It was kind of like a take a penny, leave a penny thing. That was my contribution to the Sycamore building. That was really mostly what I did. To talk about the MDO, there I am with Rob Steele, who ran the MDO. This was at the P&G Global Alumni Summit, which I was very, very happy to host. In the MDO, Okay, let me back up a little bit. I was at P&G for 6 years, from 2000 to 2006. So for the first 2 of those years, I was in purchasing, doing all this spending pool stuff I was talking about. Then I was still in the MDO, but I was working on branded entertainment and interactive marketing, it was called at the time. Probably the coolest job in the company. I was doing all sorts of fun things, talking to movie studios, record labels, TV channels, and making waves in doing that, which I thought was really, really sweet. There I am, of sort of before and after picture with our then CEO, A.G. Lafley, and saw him again a few months ago at the P&G Alumni Summit. And I'm not really sure what I did in the 6 years. I flew in the corporate jet 4 times. That's what I can tell you. I was very good at hobnobbing with some of these people, as you could see, John Pepper, one of our great CEOs as well. So really, this presentation is just my showing you a bunch of pictures with famous P&Gers. So that's mostly what I'm going to do. Hey, pictures worth 1,000 words. So really, what ended up happening is while I was working at the Peach, as I love to call it, I started doing stand-up comedy on the side. I was doing stand-up at Go Bananas Comedy Club in Montgomery, Ohio, not too far from the GO, and certainly not that far from Sycamore and Winton Woods and all that good stuff. So doing that on the side, my brother found an article in the local paper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, and it was called the Funniest Person in Cincinnati contest. And he goes, why don't you enter it? And I thought, wow, I'd never done stand-up before. Why are you showing this to me? He goes, well, you're funny and you've been writing funny stuff. Why don't you do this? So started doing stand-up comedy on the side. And there I am with David Taylor, the current CEO. See, I told you, it's really just about this. So doing stand-up comedy on the side, working in the MDO. My last 2 years, I worked at Tremor in corporate functions. Technically, I was now coded marketing. I was an ABM and working on various projects. I don't know how much you remember about Tremor, but it was a word of mouth agency that sat within corporate functions. We had internal and external clients. So Herbal Essences internally, externally we had Dell, Microsoft, ABC, I think was one of them. We had a number of clients, and that was really a fantastic job. So I ended up with a marketing background or marketing training. And whilst I was at P&G, there was a man named Maurice Coffey in brand, and he said, hey, you know, you're a funny guy. Would you like to write for the Homemade Simple newsletter? And that turned out to be an opportunity where my jokes were going out to about 15 million people in the newsletter, which was a real honor. And I really got to give a shout out to Maurice for making that happen. I thought that was really cool. I won P&G's funniest employee, which, you know, sure, all right, I'll take it. Funniest employee. You know, I say that, but at the same time, actually, there were 4 comedians that came out of P&G. I don't know what that says about working at P&G, but that's true. Josh Sneed, Greg Warren, and then I left, and then Drew, and pretty cool stuff. I don't know, that's sort of a dubious distinction, but still, you know, a lot of us have a great relationship with P&G. All right, so here's what happened after that. This is the year 2006. I turned 30 years old, and I flipped out. I took 30 really, really hard. I'm now 42. 40 was not nearly as hard, but 30 was really hard. I got to the point where, hey, this is a great company. It was a great job. I had the job, the car, the house, you know, all of that stuff. But I was like, this isn't really what I want to do for the rest of my life. I was surrounded by really good people with whom I'm still very much in touch, as you can see from the pictures. But I felt like, you know, any warm body in my shoes could probably do this job. Not any geek off the street, but certainly any intelligent person could do the jobs that I was doing. The other thing is, if I could get real for a moment, one of the programs I ran at Tremor, once we got some of the results back, I was like, man, I don't know if this stuff works. And I sort of became a little bit skeptical about some of the things that we were doing, not from an ethical perspective or anything like that. There was never any question about that, but in terms of the efficacy. And if I could be even more real, I would tell you that I had a hard time keeping up. It was, I did well. I flew on the corporate jet. I did a lot of very cool things, some resume builders, built a great network. But at the end of the day, once I left, I realized, wow, that was the bureaucracy. That's what people mean by all the red tape and the alignment meetings and having to check boxes with so many different departments. It was suffocating. It was hard. I don't think I realized how hard it was, but it was. And I think there became this question of craft. And I think that's lost in this day and age a lot of the time, where, you know, you have craftspeople, craftsmen, craftswomen, craft people who can, you know, they're cobblers, or they are they're steel workers, or whatever they are. They're marketers. their purchasers. And people love that. People love teaching. They love selling. They love marketing, but they don't like the BS that goes with it. And I found that there was just a lot of it. I'm preaching to the choir here, right? We're alumni. We could talk about that. So eventually, I moved to Los Angeles. This is my wife and I looking at the Hollywood sign. I did not yet have a wife, which is partly also why I was miserable. And moved out to Los Angeles in 2006. Spent a lot of time, about a month actually. I moved out there to be the brand manager of Fiji Water. I did that for 12 weeks and then I jumped ship. And I remember what my mom said at that point. She said, you know, Rajiv, you cannot keep getting jobs and not doing them. I thought, wow, that was a good piece of advice, Mom. Can't keep getting jobs and not doing them. So I took a month off. I left Fiji Water August 25th of 2006, and I spent September meditating, looking into myself. I wrote a 65-page self-analysis. Of course I did. Well, that is the proctoid in me. I don't call myself a proctoid because I always feel bad for a gamble. You know, there's Procter and Gamble, so people always call themselves proctoids. I'm like, you know what? I'll be a gambloid. That was on my well, should I say office? I don't have an office. A cube. It said P&G's only gambloid. That was my title, my self-described title. But let's just say the P&Gers here can appreciate a 65-page self-analysis that then got down to one page. I shared it with my former boss's boss, Jerry Priest, who is still a great friend and mentor to me. And he goes, all right, here's your challenge. You got to get this thing down to a page. You know, P&G, come on, you can't hang 65 pages on your wall. You got to get this down to a page. And I said, there's no way I can do that. But I did. I got it down to a page, I hung it on my wall, and it became a guiding document for me. I had my OGSM, my objectives, my goals, my strategies, my measures. I had the brand building framework. I had all these things that I still use to this day. And the training was really helpful. But I wrote things out like, you know, what do I want? What's the vision? You know, I want a world changed by laughter. What's my mission in life? I want to be the best comedian I can be. I want to make as many people laugh and think as I can. So those sorts of things were very, very helpful. And I've spent the last 12 years in Los Angeles as a full-time stand-up comic. And I have to thank P&G for that. That is a lot of it there. So now I can run through some more name dropping outside of the world of P&G. And of course, I still very much value my P&G connections. But there I am with Kevin Nealon when I still had hair and still did not have height. That has not changed. Opened for Kevin Nealon when I was in Cincinnati. There I am with my old roommate, Hassan Minhaj, who's now a big star. There I am with Lucy Liu, who is one of my favorite actresses, and got to meet her recently. There I am with Russell Peters, who is one of the greatest global comedians in the world, I guess global world. There I am with Bob Saget and John Mayer. So if you're not enjoying anything out of the presentation so far, hopefully you're at least getting some good pictures. There I am with Deepak Chopra, and there I am with Chris Rock way back in the day. That's when I was running Branded Entertainment actually at the Peach. There I am with Dave Chappelle, like Drew mentioned, I opened for him 5 times, which was really a thrill. There I am with Eddie Murphy, a thrill that my wife gets credit for. She's the one who got us to meet him, which was really cool. There I am with Ava Longoria, telling her to hold on for just a second. There's with the Beatles. Here's a picture of the dog that tried to bite me. Here's the Mormon Tabernacle. Okay, hopefully a few people got that reference. All right, so now that we're through that part of the presentation, I want to give you some tips and tricks. And I think we're tracking okay. I plan to spend 12 minutes on that and 15 minutes on tips, and then we'll go to Q&A. So I think we're tracking okay, Drew. I hope we're doing all right. So I can never remember if it was Chris Rock or I who said that he wants to make people, I get us mixed up all the time, who wants to make people laugh in the room and think on the way home. You don't want people to think in the room. That's a common misconception. If they're thinking, they're not laughing. You got to make them laugh. That's the biggest thing. In fact, it's a very simple job. Being a comedian is not an easy job, but it's very simple. And the simplicity of it is, it's 3 words: make people laugh. That's your job. If you also want to make them think, that's great. If you want to give them a point of view, that's awesome. Got to make them laugh. So I found out fairly early that I'm better at creating something out of nothing than I am at creating something out of something else. And so I'm good with a blank page. I'm good with blue sky. I'm very good upstream and all that sort of thing. Having said that, this business, you're not only going to have to do that, you're going to have to help people punch things up. You're going to have to take something and make something else out of it. And that has been a skill that I had to develop. I wasn't very good at it. My old roommate, Hassan, he would run jokes by me and I'd try to help him. And he's like, wow, you're not good at helping people write jokes. And I go, yeah. He goes, no, but you're worse than like just somebody even off the street. I was like, I know, I'm not good at it. And I was like, I'm good at making my own stuff. But he's like, you got to develop that skill. And I did. I worked very hard I was always good at developing something out of nothing, like I said, but I worked very hard to become a punch-up writer. I took everything I know, whether it was engineering, purchasing, marketing, politics. I interned on Capitol Hill. I'm actually coming to you right now from Washington, D.C., where I was speaking to a few Congress people last night. So took what I know from politics, from acting classes, from writing workshops, gosh, from my time at Upright Citizens Brigade and stand-up comedy. And I've given some speeches, gave a TEDx talk at University of Cincinnati, which you can look up on YouTube. It's okay, honestly, it's fine. It's not amazing. I beat myself up pretty hard after that. I'm like, it went okay, but you know what? It was new material. It's the first time I'd ever given that speech. I also turned it into a talk at Google. So you can Google those. You can look them up on YouTube, etc. and follow up with me, and I'm happy to share those with you. I think the principles were pretty good, and I shared a stage with Drew in San Francisco recently at a conference called Funny Business. Drew did a great job, by the way. He was one of the highlights of the day. So there's a lot of good material there. I don't know how well delivered. At any rate, I co-run an agency called Standpoint Agency, and I'm not going to overly sell. You can't name drop and sell. Pick one. If you want to name drop, that's great, but don't sell too hard either. So one thing that I am doing is running an agency called Standpoint Agency, and it's laying a little bit dormant. You don't really get many people who know how to use the past participle of lay or lie. I hope you appreciate that. It has lain dormant for quite a while, but my business partner Andy Gibson and Brand at Procter & Gamble and I started something where we're helping businesses generate insights. If you have competing hypotheses about consumers, about anything else, if you were trying to figure out consumer behavior, deep consumer understanding, we can help you with that. We can help you generate insights. The whole thing is based on a concept called funny because it's true. Why do we laugh at things? Because they're true. And we sort of peel back the onion from what makes people laugh. They would say, oh, well, if it made you laugh, there's got to be some truth to it. And we ran a few programs for P&G. We did one for Herbal Essences, which was really amazing. We brought in a few comedians, Bonnie McFarlane from New York, Sebastian Maniscalco from Chicago, whom Jerry Seinfeld just mentioned as one of the two comedians that he's been watching in his David Letterman interview. So we brought him to P&G, and we did a number of other things too. We performed at Go Bananas, and we had the comedians do 20 minutes on shampoo and soap, and then we did a Q&A, and then we did sort of a power dotting brainstorming session with them, which was really fantastic. And at one point during the Herbal Essences coloring session, one of the women in the audience asked a question about hair coloring, and Bonnie McFarlane, of course, a woman and a comic, gosh, she just happened to say, and this was brilliant, she said, I just want coloring my hair to be a joy, not a job. And when she said joy, not a job, the pens in the room, I think there was still pens at the time, or maybe it was the thumbs on the keyboard, went crazy. And people wrote down joy, not a job. That became the insight that led to a $50 million global restage of Herbal Essences. Shout out to Kyle Schlegel, with whom I'm still in touch. I'll see him in Chicago in a couple of weeks. He brought us in to do that, and that actually generated an insight. That was great. Joy, not a job, something that one of the comics said. So that's something that Standpoint Agency can do. What have I done? So I took my older roommate's advice, and I became pretty good at helping people punch things up, different presentations. I'm running a Kickstarter right now. You can go to fundrajiv.com, and I'm launching a talk show. And this is something that I got funded on day one, which is great. But of course, being a proper P&G'er, I had a minimum goal of $25,000, which I got on day one. But we're still running it right now. We've got a stretch goal of $50,000, right? P&G stretch goals, so we'll still try to get there. And I was talking to a consultant. He's a Kickstarter consultant. He's helped people raise $75 million on Kickstarter. And he gave an analogy. He said, look, Kickstarter is not a situation where you can just turn it on and expect people to show up. It's a birthday party. It's a venue. I'm giving you a venue. Kickstarter is a venue. And I said, well, then it's kind of like a karaoke room. right? It's not really a birthday party. It's a karaoke room. You go into karaoke, and there are different rooms there, and some of them are kind of dead, and there's one or two people in there, and they're singing "Don't Stop Believin'" for the 18th time. And then you got a room that's completely packed out, and people are walking down the hallway, and they're poking their head in that room, and they're like, "Oh, what's going on in there?" And he goes, "Oh man, that's even a better analogy than the birthday party." I go, "That's what I do. I punch things up. I take your analogies, and I take a sad song and I make it better." With the Beatles, right? So some other things that I did at the P&G Global Alumni Summit. I met a former, let's say, proctoid, right? I'm the gambloid, who wanted help in punching up her presentation, which I did. I did that for a doctor friend of mine recently, where I just made it funnier and hopefully better. I've received 3 scripts in the last, I'd say, 6 weeks, 2 for TV, 1 for film. And again, my job is to make them funnier, find jokes, structure them. So how do I do that? How do I do that? How do I punch things up? What's the secret? So this is the part that you're probably wanting to really tune in and pay attention to. So let me break it down with the first principle called incongruity. If you can see a bunch of black dots on this page, if I say, "Hey, look at the funny one," which one are you looking at? You're looking at the pink one, right? You're not looking at one of the black dots on a white background. You're looking at the pink one. Why? Well, it's funny. It stands out. It's different. That's what comedians do. We're not really walking around so much with a pen and a pad, or an iPhone or a Droid or whatever it is these days, looking for something that's funny. We're waiting for something that stands out, right? It's kind of like shopping. You're not necessarily looking for a pair of pants, but something grabs your attention. You're like, "Oh, I'll take that pair of pants." You're looking for something that kind of grabs your attention. And so that's what we're doing. What stands out? What is incongruent? And that's the first thing that we do. We look for things that are incongruent. So anything in your presentations, in your memos, in your recos, something will stand out, and it's important to write that down. That's one difference between us and civilians, is we write things down. For Drew and me, that's an important thing, is to commit it to paper and then try to dig and dig and dig until you figure out what exactly it is that's catching your attention about it. The second thing is the target. You don't want to ask what's funny about this. That's another common mistake in humor, is people are kind of trying to make jokes, and they're trying too hard to make a joke. That's fine. You can make jokes. There's nothing wrong with that. But the question isn't what's funny about this. The question is, what are the writers making fun of? That is really the core of writing comedy, is you're trying to figure out who the victim is. And victim isn't a bad word in comedy, by the way. It doesn't have the severity it does in other contexts. But we're really trying to figure out who the butt of the joke is. What is the butt of the joke? What are we making fun of? What is the point we're trying to get across? When my physician friend, one of my physician friends, I'm Indian, right? So one of my physician friends was punching up he needed help punching up a presentation that he was giving in Costa Rica. And he had a joke. He's Asian, and he had a joke about just kind of a general joke about he went out to audition for The Last Emperor and The Golden Child. These are huge movies in the late 80s. Last Emperor, I think, won Best Picture in 87, something like that. And his brother got the role. And he had taken his brother to the audition. His mom did, because they were very small. And he had some joke in there. It was funny, but he did some joke about, hey, of course, they're looking for Asians in LA, so they came to Chinatown, or something like that. And it was funny. But I was like, you know what? What's funnier about this is that you took your brother to the audition and he booked it and you didn't. Like, that's way funnier. Make yourself the butt of the joke. That, first of all, self-deprecation is generally a good tack. Secondly, it's far more personal. They say that which is most personal is most general. And that's way funnier than and way more specific to you, and a joke that other people cannot make. That you took your brother to the audition because you wanted to spend time with him, and he booked the role. That's tragic, and they say tragedy plus time equals comedy. So make yourself the victim. Another principle is, if this is true, what else is true? We learned that at UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade, in improv school, improv and sketch school. If this is true, what else is true? And that really helps with brainstorming. If you have a mental block, if you're trying to figure out, what else to write, what else to include, it's not just true for comedy, but it is largely true for comedy as well, which is, if this is true, what else is true? You brainstorm the world you're creating, and you make connections to uncover other nuggets, which is what a lot of our comedians do for Standpoint Agency. That they're like, how am I going to write 20 minutes on shampoo? And you start with one thing, and it leads to another. The rule of 3 is really, really big in stand-up comedy. Most of the time, it's 3 guys walk into a bar, right? So you hear that a lot of the time. And Why? Why is it 3 exactly? Why isn't it 2? Why isn't it 4? Well, it's about establishing a pattern. Every joke you've ever heard in your life is a pattern. It's a pattern that gets broken. Every joke you've heard is 1, 2, 4. Right? That is it. We establish a pattern, and that is misdirection, and then we reveal the surprise at the end. You probably thought I was going to say 1, 2, 3, right? Well, that would not be a joke. 1, 2, 3 is not a joke, and 1, 2, 7 is not a joke. 1, 2, 4, you can kind of go, oh, you were doubling the numbers. You can quote unquote see what I did there, and you go, oh, he wasn't counting. It was a surprise. He was doubling them. So that's what the structure of a joke really is. It's not 1, 2, 3. That's you're just counting. I'd go 1, 2, 3, and you'd be like, okay, so what? Or if I said 1, 2, 7, that's not a pattern. That's too confusing. You don't really know what 7 has to do with 1 and 2, but 1, 2, 4 makes a lot of sense. Metaphors are very, very powerful. Using metaphors, similes, analogies is very good. You'll hear a lot of stand-up comics or writers or improvisers say, hey, that's like this. This is like that. Not that you don't watch comedy, you probably do, but turn on the late night shows tonight and watch Kimmel, Fallon, Colbert, all these guys. You know that a lot of the time their jokes will be like, hey, that'd be like this, or this is kind of like that, or this reminds me of this, and sort of painting that picture, so to speak, of using a metaphor or a simile is very powerful. Another one is exaggeration. Sometimes instead of going to the side, which is what a metaphor is, it's like this, you're kind of painting a lateral picture, you go up, you go to exaggeration. It's called heightening, and tall tales are a great example of this, going to the absurd, going to the extreme. At UCB, you learn that as well. There are three scenes. Usually the first scene is something very kind of mundane and pedestrian and very everyday, and then you heighten it. You go to the second scene, and then you go to the third, and they always almost end up in hell or in space or someplace where you can't heighten it anymore. You can't go any farther than space. You can't go any worse than hell. And you'll find yourself, you're talking to the devil in hell. And it was like, how did we get here? Well, because you heightened. You went from, a bully to someone who's a really bad guy. And then you go to the devil. You can't go any worse than that, right? So a lot of the time you just heighten and heighten and heighten until there's nowhere to go. It's kind of like the old line my mom told me a million times, never to exaggerate. We get to callbacks. Callbacks is referring to something you said earlier. It's one of the biggest laughs you can get. If you ask people, hey, what's your favorite thing about stand-up comedy? A lot of the time, and back in the day especially, they say, I love it when comedians bring it back. I love it when they tie it into something they said before. That's something you can definitely do in your presentations. You can mention something in the beginning, and you can call it back at the end. One of the most powerful things you can do. And it kind of creates an inside joke, which is what theater is. And when you're presenting your theater, you're giving a performance of sorts, and people want to believe that whatever's happening right now is happening to us. For the people who are attending this webinar, yep, people can watch it later and listen to it later. That's great, and we welcome you too. But the people who are tuned in are watching it live. What could happen? What's he going to say? And that just doesn't only refer to me, but anyone who's doing this sort of thing. They want to feel like they're special, and when you call something back or refer to something that happened in the room or improvise, that's a great thing. So borrowing, use Google liberally. There's nothing wrong with borrowing jokes, especially if you cite them. I wish I could cite this one. This is, well, I am right at the bottom right, Joel Pitt. One of my all-time favorite cartoons, not to get overly political, but I love this. The Climate Summit, where it's energy independence, preserve rainforests, et cetera, this whole thing up on the screen, and this heckler stands up in the back and screams out, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? I love it. It makes the point gently in a funny way, whether you're liberal or conservative. Even my conservative friends can laugh at that and go, all right, man, that's pretty funny. But use them liberally. I think that telling jokes, just straight up telling jokes in a presentation or in a meeting, it's not bad, or at the bottom of your emails, or anything like that. Just a harmless joke is good. I could share a few with you right now. They're pretty lame, but I think they're pretty funny. Yesterday I bought the world's worst thesaurus. Not only is it terrible, it's terrible. Okay, another one is a dog. A dog goes into a telegram office. He takes out a blank form and he writes, woof, 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 woof. The clerk examines the paper and politely tells the dog, you know, there are only 9 words here, but you actually get 10. You could send another woof for the same price. And the dog replies, but that wouldn't make any sense. Okay. Anyway, so let's move on. If we have time at the end, I'll tell you a few more jokes. That's how I'd like to close. And you're like, oh, okay, great. Well, we'll make sure that we log off before that. So there's a guy named Dr. Peter McGraw. He came up with a theory called benign violation. He talks a lot about how jokes work as long as they violate, but in a benign manner, which is getting harder and harder these days. I'll blame the left for that, right? Did I just make fun of the right? I'll make fun of the left too. So I'll blame the liberal thought police for that. An analogy I like to give is like going up and down a roller coaster. You can see a picture of a roller coaster here, a very scary one in my opinion. Jokes build tension. That's what they do. Jokes build and build and build as they're told, and you can kind of feel the crowd kind of anticipating, like, where is she going with this? Where is she going with this? And the comedian is up there, and it's getting a little bit tense, and then that's the setup of the joke, and then the punchline is you go down the hill, right? So if you can make people go up a 100-foot hill and you give them a 10-foot drop, they're going to be disappointed. But if you give them a 100-foot drop, you're going to adequately break the tension in the room. And all I'm going to say then, if you're going to go there, if you're going to take a risk with a joke, be sure what you're saying is funny. My junior year British lit teacher in high school always said to us, if you're going to be wrong, be amusing. So that was a good one there. It was a good piece of advice. Another one is that drama is global, comedy is local. Make sure an international audience, which I'm sure is tuned in right now, gets your references. I had some references earlier in the presentation that I took out because this is a global audience. One of them was growing up in Cincinnati. I was the original Fairfield Indian. Okay, the people who are tuned in from Cincinnati and who watch high school sports will totally get that. I'm Indian from India, not Indian Native American. They'll get that Indians are a mascot for Fairfield. Why did I not do that joke? Well, because people aren't going to get, they're not going to get it. They're not going to get your references. So I volunteered at the tennis tournament in Cincinnati. It's a global event, and Drew mentioned that. I did my act for Pete Sampras. I wanted to do it for all the players around the world, and I pitched the director of the tournament, Paul Flory, rest in peace, one of my great friends, and actually how I got my job at Procter & Gamble was through Paul Flory. I was sitting in his office and goes, how would you like to work at Procter & Gamble? It was like a movie. I was like, is this happening right now? And he put me in touch with Steve Korach in recruiting, and put me in touch with Jerry Priest, who became my boss. But I remember pitching him. I'm like, I want to do stand-up for all the players. And he goes, you know what? It's not going to translate. It's not you. It's them. It's the language barrier. And, you know, a lot of people here who are playing tennis, some of them don't speak English, or it's not a first language for them. So you got to make sure. He goes, that's why we have magicians. It translates in all languages. And I never performed for all the players, but well, we can regale you with some other tennis stories and comedy stories another day. Another interesting thing is that some comedians say funny things. Other comedians say things funny. Sometimes people will differentiate this with comics and comedians, and Seinfeld did that a little bit recently on the Letterman show, his one on Netflix, where he said, I don't know if he said this exactly, but it's kind of known, and Drew knows this to an extent as well, which is that comics say funny things and comedians say things funny. The point really being there is that there's material and there's delivery. Some things are funny on the page, so that's something to keep in mind if you're going to turn something in. Some bosses and some managers, some people in general, are managers people, they are, right? They're readers first and then listeners. And sometimes they're listeners and then readers. It was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got at P&G. Is somebody told me that, you know, like, hey, I'm a reader first, so send me your reco and then let's talk about it. Other people are the other way around. They want to chat it up first and then they want to see it on paper later. Of course, it's going to end up as a one-page memo. We know that, but how do we get there? Another presentation is a really important thing in terms of knowing your audience. My two-up manager at Tremor, Gary DeJesus, had a really good rule. He said, you know, I wear 3 hats as your boss. I'm an evaluator, I'm a sounding board, and I can be your buddy. He goes, generally, I'm your 2-up boss. You walk into my office, he had a cube. You walk into his cube, and he's like, I've got my evaluator hat on. I'm forming an opinion. That's what I'm doing. You're going over something with me. You're talking to me. I'm judging you. That's what I'm doing. I'm your boss. But if you want to be me to be a sounding board, just say that. Write draft at the top of your memo. Tell me, I just want to come in and bounce some ideas off, and I'll bounce ideas off with you. I won't judge you. I won't form an opinion. We're just talking, and I'll help you develop your reco. And then the third one, he goes, I could be a venter. You know, you just want to come into my office and bitch and just complain and moan about this place. All right, just tell me you're doing that. We'll put our feet up and we'll put our hands behind our head and we'll just talk about, yeah, blah, 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 the red tape and the bureaucracy. And he goes, that's totally fine. He goes, but you got to tell me what hat to wear. And most miscommunication happens that way. And I thought that was a really, really helpful thing, just to make sure that you're on the same page. There are funny solutions. Sometimes jokes can be funny solutions. I don't know if you remember the movie When Harry Met Sally, but sometimes solutions can be very humorous. One of the quotes that Harry says to Sally, he says, but really, what's so hard about finding an apartment? What you do is you read the obituary column. Yeah, you find out who died and you go to the building and you tip the doorman. What they can do to make it easier is to combine the obituaries with the real estate section. Say then you'd have, hey, Mr. Klein died today, leaving a wife, 2 children, and a spacious 3-bedroom apartment with a wood-burning fireplace, right? So not a bad idea, not a bad idea. So sometimes your jokes can be solutions, not just identifying the problem, but the solution, which we, of course, love, even as recovering corporate Americans. How about that? Another principle in comedy, and I'll wrap this up in just a couple minutes because I think we have just a few minutes before we got to get to the Q&A. So let me give myself maybe 3 minutes to wrap this up, and then we'll turn it back over to Drew, considering it's 9:43 a.m. Eastern. Another thing you learn is that chrysanthemums are funnier than flowers. What does that mean? It means that you need to be as specific as you can be. They always say in acting class, if your scene is falling short, you need to call the UPS truck. And I'm not just saying that because what can Brown do for you, but it's called the UPS truck. Make it more urgent, specific. How about that? Urgent, personal, and specific. Pacific. I live in LA, so we live in the Pacific Ocean. Maybe that's where my mind is going. I'll be going home soon. So urgent, personal, and specific. Like I was telling the doctor who was giving the presentation, make it personal to you. Make yourself the victim of the joke, and it'll get a bigger laugh. So be specific. That which is most personal is most general. Tell stories about yourself. When you're brainstorming, go to your own experience. That's going to help you a lot. Be as specific as possible. Chrysanthemums are funnier than flowers. Meaning if you're walking in and somebody asks you, what do you got there? What's that a bouquet of? You say chrysanthemums. It's a funnier word. It's more specific. It paints a picture. Never move on a laugh line. I sort of blew that. I mispronounced burning, but hopefully the Harry Met Sally thing was still funny. You never move on a laugh line. When you're saying something, if you're giving a presentation, you freeze. Watch TV. Turn it on tonight. Watch some of the sitcoms, especially the multi-camera, meaning that they have a studio audience. Watch them. They don't move when they do a punchline. That's a very, very important point. Just stay in place. Do something called rooting. Stay in one place. You root, don't like root for the audience, but you root. It's like a plant growing out of the ground. You stay in one place and you'll feel energy coming to you. Don't move on a laugh line. Imitate somebody. Like I was saying, you can use Google liberally. Don't worry about that. Jerry Seinfeld, why is he funny? He's funny for a lot of reasons, but he's got a comedic voice. What's the deal? What's the deal with chrysanthemums, right? He talks like that. He makes a lot of his interviews funny just in the way that he talks. There's no shame in doing an impression. Not a blatant ripoff, but who in your life is funny? Is it people that you watch, like Dave Chappelle, Tim Allen? Is it your brother? Sometimes I go into my brother mode. He's very funny. He's very animated. And sometimes I'll deliver some of my jokes on stage like Rakesh would because he's just funny. Most comedians have a funnier sibling. Drew, you can tell us if you do too, but most comedians have a funnier sibling, and he's definitely funny. Sometimes you can go into doing an impression of somebody. I don't mean literally rip off the person or figuratively, but you can take on a different persona when you're going to say something funny. You want to write the news, then the jokes. I ran a kind of a mini daily show back in the day, very, very small one, but I had my writing staff and they would bring me like funny stories, kind of funny, dirty stories sometimes. And I was like, guys, don't write jokes. Give me the news. Let's write the news first, then we'll do the jokes. And that's a really important one to remember is you're not trying to, your primary presentation or objective, I should say, in your presentations oftentimes isn't to make the room laugh. You're not a stand-up comic, most people on this call, but that's a secondary thing, and it can be the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine of truth go down. That's usually what humor is. And the only other thing I would say about this is you can use different humor types. I wrote a blog post about 9 different types of humor. There's awkward, there's obscure, there's campy. There are 9 different ones. And the ones you really want to focus on here would be like clever, cheesy. Cheesy's okay, that works. Groaners are okay. And in corporate America, you'd rather be groaned than actually offend somebody. And then friendly, just kind of friendly, when you watch morning news shows and Jeff Glor on the evening news and some of the comments he makes, it's just friendly. It's not supposed to be hilarious, but there it is. So let me end this part by saying that there are 4 things you can do with your voice. I think this was, my friend is a dialect coach. She's actually here in DC right now. She's working on Wonder Woman 2, pretty crazy things that she's doing. And she told me, look, there are 4 things you can do with your voice, because she directed my one-person show. She said you can be, whoops, I didn't write this down. Okay, hopefully I can remember them. No, here it is. Okay, speed, volume, tone, and pitch. Speed, volume, tone, pitch. You can go faster, right? Speed. You can go slower. You can take up the volume, and you can take down the volume. You can take it down to almost a whisper, or even whisper, and you can go way up loud again. You can do that with your voice. There's tone, right? A lot of time, why'd you get in a fight? Because of tone, right? What was your intent? What was the tone? Were you angry? Are you trying to be funny? Are you trying to be insightful? You can change the tone of your voice, and then the pitch. And pitch, like I said, usually if you talk up louder like Seinfeld, it's funnier. So you can change the pitch of your voice. So I thought that was extremely helpful for varying your presentation. You can change the speed of your voice, the volume, the tone, and the pitch. Let me stop there now. Those were the tips and tricks. Hopefully you found some practical applications there. I want to turn it back over to Drew for Q&A, and then we will wrap it up with a couple of jokes and a closing. But in case you have to sign off now, I'm at Funny Indian. I'm funnyyindian.com. You could find me there, or fundrajiv.com. So there I am. Let me turn it back to Drew. Thank you very much.
There we go. Thank you, Rajiv. Yeah, so if you have any specific questions that you want to ask Rajiv, certainly feel free to type those into the Q&A spot. I think one question that has come up is, and I'll frame it this way, is that, you kind of mentioned for you, it was it's easier with a blank screen. For other people, it might be easier to kind of react. And what I think it speaks to is that different people are going to have different styles. Some people are going to be, more natural as, like, say, an improviser, more as a writer, more as like a kind of stand-up comedian type. How do you think people find that out? How do they discover kind of their style of humor?
I think that's a great question. And sometimes it's just the fear of, fear or excitement, right? Anxiety is usually nerves plus excitement. So are you turned on by a blank page or a blue sky, or does that scare you? Like, where do you find yourself in a meeting piping up the most? Is it towards the beginning? Do you feel like, hey, I kind of want to, like, move my arms around. I need some space here. You're using my oxygen, son, right? As he's saying, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. You're using up my oxygen. Like, do you feel like you need to be more upstream? Then you're probably someone who's better at creating something out of nothing. Again, this is just one person's opinion. Or do you kind of turn it on a little bit? Do you come off the bench a little bit more? Like, are you not one of the starting 5, but you come off the bench and you need some momentum? And you can take other people's things and you can make them better. So I think that those are some of the ways, just kind of like the fear and the excitement of, are you speaking up a little bit more towards the beginning or more towards the middle or the end?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, it, like anything that you're trying new, any type of experimentation that you do, it's all just kind of testing stuff. Like, if you're inspired to, want to use humor a little bit more, try a couple of things. Try, first writing out of nothing, or writing in response to something, or being more conversational. I think, you practice it and see what sticks and what doesn't. I think you kind of spoke to a number of those things as well, whether it is, kind of observing what other comedians do, or even sharing some ideas out, borrowing from others. Is, a lot of times we start in that process to learn to make things a little bit easier, and then your own process, your own style, your own persona is going to evolve out of that, but at least gives you a starting point. From kind of the methodology standpoint, thinking about the idea of comedy and insights, one question is, from a methodology standpoint, how do comedians come up with insights? Is it that they are seeking those insights and that it happens to become funny, or they find what's funny and then because of what's funny, an insight comes from that? Does that make sense?
I think it does, and let me know if I'm not answering the question, but I think it goes back to the first principle of incongruity and finding something that sticks out. So not necessarily looking for what's funny, but letting it come to you by something that catches your attention. That's the first thing I'd say. The second of 2 things I would say is peeling back the onion. So the reason Standpoint Agency, I believe, works is because it's based on the principle funny because it's true. We said, look, a lot of times people will say something, people will laugh, or it doesn't matter. They could laugh, they could groan, they could boo, they could walk out. You elicited a reaction, and that's the important thing. Obviously in stand-up comedy, you want to make them laugh, but whatever people do, as long as it's not silence. Silence means that it didn't resonate. They didn't get it. That what you said isn't true, at least to them. And if they boo or they groan, they at least got it. It registered a response. And so our idea was, okay, whatever elicited a response, there's some truth in that. Let's peel that back through the structure we have, which is stand-up comics deliver a monologue, and then the brand teams, or it was purchasing, sales, R&D, anyone could be in the room, consumers, and they would ask questions like, how'd you pull the rabbit out of the hat? How did you come up with that joke? And sometimes the comedian doesn't even know, but together through power dotting and through brainstorming, etc., that's what was powerful about that, was being able to dial it back and peel the onion back. I know I keep saying that, but it really is that, and finding that core insight. So a lot of the time it isn't just one person who can do it, but sometimes the chef or the comic or the magician didn't really know how she came up with it, but you're like, oh, that's what it was. Did that answer it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that to your point earlier on, if this is true, what else is true, that is a great way to write comedically, but it's also a great way to define insights as well, right? If this concept, if we made people laugh because of this idea, then there, like you said, there's some nugget there that can be explored a little bit further. And I know, and I'm sure you've experienced is that sometimes the insight comes right away, and sometimes it's like, much later where you're like, oh, this is why that thing was funny, or it comes from someone else seeing it. Oh, that's so interesting because of X, Y, or Z, and you're like, oh, I never thought of that. I just like the word bananas in that sentence.
Right. That's totally true. And that's what I loved about P&G in terms of some of the conversational tone that was used in some of the recos. I remember reading about insights in brand, and one of them was an insight is true, but a great insight is so true. And it had, 3 O's. And I was like, oh, it's kind of funny at P&G that they would have so true as one of their things, but it really got the point across. You're like, yeah, that's right. When you like tilt your head back and go, that's so, that's why we, at Standpoint, we call it pulling the aha from the haha, right? So something made you laugh, and then you're like, oh, what's the aha moment? It's like, it's somewhere in the haha, it's somewhere in the funny. And that's why we're able to come up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for sake of time, that's all the time we have for questions. But there are people had a couple of other questions as well. What's the best way for people to kind of get a hold of you, and what how do you want to wrap up?
Sure. Thank you, Drew. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. Of course, as a comic, you're always looking for some metric. If you can't hear laughter, you're looking at the number of attendees, and it stayed pretty consistent. So that's good. I think the pessimist would say it stayed flat, but the optimist, I'm an optimist, will say it stayed consistent. It didn't drop. So that's a good thing. We just went through the Q&A, which is great. I like to just close by saying, hopefully, some of the ideas you got here were original. But as it's been said many times, good artists borrow, great artists steal. I said that, I didn't really. And if you want to find me, this is where you can find me. I'm at Funny Indian on social media, and that's my Kickstarter page right there. So you're welcome to ask me questions. I do get back to people, whether it's on LinkedIn or Instagram, maybe not Snapchat, but the best way to reach me is through email. I would just say Rajiv@funnyindian.com. And I want to thank Drew. I'll leave you with a joke. That'll be the last thing I do here, but I do want to thank Drew for having me on, and Ida Abdulkhani, who had contacted me and the entire P&G team. You guys have always been really fantastic to me, and you don't do 13 gigs for your old company unless you have a good relationship with P&G. So that's really fantastic. So I'll leave you with this joke. This man joins this monastery, and he has to take a vow of silence. So he goes in there and he finds this out, vow of silence, and he learns that there's a loophole. Every 7 years you could say 2 words. So he's there for 7 years. He goes into the Great Hall, and the elders ask him for his 2 words, and he clears his throat, and he says, cold floors. They nod silently, and he goes away. 7 more years go by, 14 years. They call him back in. They ask him for his 2 words, and he clears his throat, and he goes, bad food. They nod their head silently, and he goes away again. 7 more years go by, 21 years, over 2 decades. They call him back in, and they ask for his 2 words. He clears his throat, and he goes, I quit. And one of the elders looks at him and says, that's not surprising. You've done nothing but complain since you got here.
That's a great joke. It's a great, and that's a great example of, and this is what I appreciate about your presentation with how you started and kind of what you included throughout is that's a great example of what you talked about building that tension, building it up and saying, okay, where is this going? And also an example of the rule of three, right? The 1, 2, 3. We get the two initial things there. So thank you very much, Rajiv, for sharing your insights and helping us all to learn a little bit more on how to be funny. Like Rajiv mentioned, you can find him on social media at Funny Indian on pretty much everything, or just Google that and you will find him. We'll also send out through the email links to his website and thefunrajiv.com if you want to take a look at the Kickstarter. A couple of quick closing announcements are the same as before. If you want to make sure you're getting updates, go to pgalums.com to sign up for those updates. You can support the foundation at pgalums.com/foundation. And if you want to partner with us, potentially sponsor, you can find out more there. If you have any questions or you want to learn how you can volunteer, or if you want to join a chapter in your area, if you don't want have one in your area and you want to start one, or any other thoughts at all, just go ahead and email us at hello@pgalums.com. This has been another series of the PNG Alumni webinar. I've been Andrew Tarvin, your host and MC. Have a great rest of your morning, noon, or evening, wherever you may happen to be, and have a good one. Thanks, everyone.